In the final years of the Second World War, a single mistake would rise from the shadows of confusion, hesitation, and overconfidence to crush the mighty Imperial Japanese Navy, a force that once ruled the Pacific with fearsome precision. This is the story of how one decision wrapped in pride and miscalculation shattered the backbone of an empire and ended centuries of naval tradition in a way no one had imagined at the beginning of the Pacific War. Japan believed its navy was unstoppable. It had aircraft carriers unmatched in skill and coordination, battleships of extraordinary size, and crews trained with relentless discipline. The attack on Pearl Harbor gave Japan confidence so deep that its admirals believed they had already broken American power, but this confidence would soon shift into overconfidence, which became the seed of their greatest mistake. Japan's military strategy was based on a single assumption that the United States would lose heart after suffering heavy casualties. At the beginning of the war, Japanese leaders believed they could knock out the American fleet, shock the nation, and force the United States to accept Japanese control over the Pacific. This belief guided every major decision made by the Japanese high command, but the Americans did not retreat. They did not surrender. They rebuilt, reorganized, and struck back with industrial force. Japan could not match the first major crack in Japanese strategy came in the Battle of Midway. The Japanese Navy entered the battle expecting to ambush the American carriers and finish what had begun at Pearl Harbor, but the Americans had cracked Japanese codes. The Japanese fleet sailed into a trap. Confusion, miscommunication, and hesitation plagued the Japanese command structure. Admiral Nagumo faced a critical choice: reload aircraft for ship attack or prepare for land strikes. The pressure led to delay, and this delay opened the door for American dive bombers to strike. The results were catastrophic. Japan lost 4 carriers in one day, carriers that had trained the best pilots in the world, carriers that could not be replaced because training new naval aviators took years and Japan did not have years left yet. This was not the mistake that ultimately destroyed Japan's navy. It was only the beginning. After Midway, Japan still had battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and a powerful tradition of naval warfare, but its leaders failed to understand how the war had changed. They believed battleships could still turn the tide. They believed fighter pilots could somehow be trained fast enough. They believed the Americans were just lucky. At Midway, this refusal to accept reality would lead to the true fatal mistake. That mistake was choosing to fight a decisive battle at Leyte Gulf without real understanding of American strength. The Japanese command believed the Americans were stretched thin. They believed they could lure the American carriers away, crush the invasion fleet at Leyte, and stall the American advance in the Philippines. The plan was bold, but boldness without intelligence becomes disaster. The Japanese underestimated American radar, American submarines, American air power, and American ability to coordinate multiple fleets over vast distances. The Japanese Navy launched Operation Show, a desperate gamble to divide American forces and strike from 3 directions, but the problem was not in the plan alone, it was in the assumptions that shaped it. The Japanese believed the sinking of their carriers at Midway had not changed the nature of war. They thought battleships could still dominate even as aircraft ruled the skies. They believed kamikaze forces could compensate for lack of trained pilots. They believed the Americans were weaker than they actually were. All these assumptions blended into one massive miscalculation. As the battle began, everything fell apart faster than the Japanese expected. American submarines ambushed the Japanese center force in the Palawan Passage, sinking 2 cruisers and damaging others before the main battle had even started. This caused confusion and delay. Another blow came when Admiral Ozawa, commander of the Northern Force, used his empty carriers as bait. These carriers looked terrifying from afar, but they carried almost no aircraft. They were sacrifices intended to lure American carriers away, but American intelligence quickly realized the trick. The U.S. fleet sent only part of its force to deal with the decoy, which meant the rest remained to guard the landing beaches at Leyte. Then came the moment of irreversible destruction. Admiral Kurita, commander of the center force, managed to break through the San Bernardino Strait and approached the American escort carriers near Samar. The Japanese battleships, including the mighty Yamato, should have slaughtered the lightly armed American ships, but surprise turned into hesitation. Kurita misread the situation. He believed he was facing a much larger fleet. He feared being surrounded. He feared losing the last major battleships of Japan, and so despite having overwhelming firepower, he ordered a retreat. That retreat shattered the last remaining hope of the Imperial Japanese Navy. It ended the possibility of halting the American advance. It crushed morale and destroyed the myth of Japanese naval superiority. But the true mistake, the one historians now mark as the fatal turning point, was not tactical, it was strategic. The Japanese high command failed to understand the new age of naval warfare. They believed that courage could replace technology. They believed training shortcuts could replace years of experience. They believed battleships could defeat aircraft. They believed kamikaze strikes could stop a modern industrial giant. They believed Japan could win a war of attrition against the United States, a nation with limitless steel oil factories and manpower. This belief was the true mistake, the one that destroyed Japan's navy more than any single battle, more than any enemy strike, more than any loss of ships. By late 1944, Japan had almost no experienced pilots left. The skies were dominated by American aircraft. The seas were patrolled by American submarines, which sank Japanese ships faster than they could be replaced. Oil was so scarce that many ships never left port. Fuel shortages crippled operations. The Navy that once roared across the Pacific now sat silently, unable to move, unable to fight. The Imperial Japanese Navy died not only in battle, but in decisions made long before those battles, decisions rooted in pride and tradition, decisions rooted in a refusal to adapt to a new kind of war. The mistake that destroyed Japan's navy was the belief that past victories guaranteed future success, the belief that bravery could replace strategy, the belief that skill alone could defeat an enemy with endless resources and rapidly advancing technology. Even as the war neared its end, Japanese leaders continued to waste their remaining strength on hopeless operations. They sent massive battleships like Yamato on suicide missions fueled for one-way trips. They launched kamikaze waves hoping fear could replace firepower. They sacrificed thousands of young pilots with only a few hours of training. Their desperation only deepened the disaster, but the tragedy was that none of this had to happen if Japanese leaders had accepted that naval warfare had changed, if they had focused on preserving carriers, protecting pilots, and conserving resources. If they had avoided the reckless battles that drained their strength, the war might have lasted much longer and the Navy might not have been wiped out so completely. The destruction of Japan's Navy was not caused by a single bomb or a single strike. It was the final result of one fatal belief that Japan could win a modern war with old strategies and outdated thinking. As American forces rolled across the Pacific one island at a time, Japan's Navy dwindled until only shadows remained, ships trapped without fuel, aircraft grounded, pilots gone. The once mighty fleet that terrified the world at the start of the war disappeared into history, leaving behind lessons written in sacrifice and loss, lessons about strategy, leadership, and the cost of refusing to change. In the end, the greatest naval disaster in Japanese history was not a battle, it was a mindset, a choice, a belief sustained for too long. The mistake that destroyed Japan's Navy was the belief that they could not lose, and by the time they realized the truth, there was nothing left to save. So if you like this video, don't forget to share this video with your friends and subscribe this channel. Also like this video.